Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the DAR Legislative and Regulatory Forum for 2026. My name is Chris Allen. I am the current chair of DAR's Public Policy Committee, and I'm joined today by Joe Brennan, our Director of Government Affairs, Andy Taylor, DAR's Legal Counsel, and Caitlin Vanoy of NAR's Legal Advocacy team. Glad to have you all here today. This forum is our chance to walk through everything that's happened on the legislative and regulatory front for over the past year and what it means for you and your clients heading into the rest of 2026. Let me quickly introduce the panel. Joe Brennan, our Director of Government Affairs, myself, Chris Allen, Chair of Public Policy Committee, Andy Taylor, our DAR Legal Counsel, and from NAR, Caitlin Vanoy, Director of Legal Advocacy, along with Elaine Wise and Austin Perez. A couple of quick logistics before we dive in. This is a webinar, so you'll be muted throughout. Please use the chat to submit any questions as they come up. And we are recording this session, so it will be available on demand afterward if you need to revisit anything. I'm going to hand it over to Caitlin Vanoy, NAR's Director of Legal Advocacy, to discuss a subject we are eager to learn about, how to navigate AI. Please take it away, Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Christine. We're so excited to be here today. As she said, I am Caitlin Vanoy, NAR's Director of Legal Advocacy. I work on the policy team. I'm actually going to hand it over shortly here to two subject matter experts from the policy team within NAR. But I just wanted to open with a big shout out to NAR's policy team. We have so much going on outside of just AI and tech, but also the 21st Century Road to Housing bill being passed, which you'll hear about from Elaine Weiss shortly. But from the property rights, private property rights perspective, constitutional protections with a lot of the work that I do on the legal advocacy side, but also to the business issues, conventional financing, the federal housing financing and federal financing and housing programs, to our land use and environmental team as well. So I want to open with just by saying we are so excited to be here. I want to give a shout out to the NAR Washington report. You can find what the policy team is doing at the Washington report, and I'll put a link in the chat so you guys can check that out. It's a great resource for all things happening on the regulatory side in DC. So I'm going to start here with Austin Perez, our Senior Policy Representative for Insurance Issues, and he has been doing a fantastic job covering our tech and AI issues as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Austin. Thank you.
Thank you. And Caitlin is fantastic. She came in and took over our legal advocacy at NAR. And so, I mean, we are so far ahead of the curve. And thank you very much, Austin Perez. With NAR's policy advocacy team, we represent your interests before members of Congress and federal agencies, and we very much appreciate the resources you provide us. And in the office in Washington, if you have not visited it, you're a drive away overlooking the Capitol. It's absolutely amazing. So I've been asked to spend a few minutes talking a little bit about our latest efforts on artificial intelligence. I first want to note I was holding this position temporarily while we hired a new director of tech policy. We now have Susan Frederick. I accepted this speaking engagement just before she was hired. So I'm going to give you an update on what we've done up until this date, but we will definitely connect you with Susan going forward. All right, so as you all know, artificial intelligence, AI, has become standard in real estate, whether it's creating listings, analyzing markets, or providing customer service. Real estate professionals are already using AI tools throughout the process. At the same time, policymakers are paying close attention, both at the federal and state level. More than 1,700 bills have been introduced to regulate AI across the states over the past year alone. It's now approaching 1,800. I need to update that figure. Many different ways and aspects to regulate it. What you need to know is that there's an absolute ton of these bills out there, and I'm going to share with you some of the common areas that you need to be aware of. One of the top priorities in ER, we're advocating for uniform national standards as compared with a state patchwork of conflicting laws. We're also, we've adopted policy. Actually, we've gone to the board of directors 6 times on AI related issues. We cover everything from fair housing and copyright to data privacy, cybersecurity, and consumer protection. One of the biggest debates in Washington, D.C. right now, I'm going to give you a little bit of inside the Beltway terminology. A lot of what the states and the federal government are grappling with is, where do you place the regulations and responsibilities? On the one hand, there is the point of view that the regulation should be on the developer, the company that builds and trains the AI tool. On the other, there are a number of states that would treat the deployer or the user of AI as the person who would be policing whether the tool they use discriminates, for instance, algorithmic bias or discrimination. This distinction matters. Most real estate professionals, as you know, you're not building these AI systems. They're off-the-shelf systems that you're using. Most of you don't have in-house compliance staff or legal counsel to help govern how you use these tools. They are black boxes in the traditional sense of the word, into which we cannot see. We do not know how they are built or trained or controlled. So our position, NER's position, and we've been meeting with members of Congress and helping support our state associations, our position is, yes, our members should be responsible for the tools that they use, but real estate professionals should not be responsible for hidden defects in the tools and systems that they do not create and cannot possibly reasonably monitor or audit. Responsibility for those issues should be with the parties that build, that train, that control, that have visibility and knowledge of those technologies. That's why we're encouraging lawmakers in Washington, D.C. to narrow their definition of deployers to exclude the end users. Real estate is one of the largest end users of AI. But from a member risk management perspective, let me just say right now, my advice is to start thinking about how you're using AI tools. Don't wait for Congress or your state real estate commissioner to tell you what to do. The way I would think about this, if I was a brokerage, how you regulate unlicensed assistants at this point, that's the way you should be thinking about AI in terms of oversight. Here are the 3 kind of basic points. Keep humans involved in all high-risk housing decisions. Review all AI-generated content before it publishes, before it reaches the consumer. Protect your client-sensitive information and make sure that your actions are consistent with state licensing law and your contractual obligations. One practical way to think about this is, however you're supervising an unlicensed assistant, you should probably supervise AI use in very much the same manner. To help our members, we have at NER provided a template of what an AI policy would look like. It would provide you, you can download it now, or if you like, Joe, if you can't find it, we can get you a copy of it. But it's an off-the-shelf policy to help you document responsible use of AI, maintaining human oversight, and promoting compliance with existing laws. Finally, I should mention this is not just a inside the beltway kind of issue. Delaware policymakers right now are actively looking at examining AI. I know that there's legislation. It's not likely to move, but there's been some movement on legislation in order to require disclosure of the use of chatbots. Everyone's providing those chatbots these days, from Zillow to MLS to various larger brokerage. While these proposals are not likely to become law in this session, it highlights that this is an issue that is taking place in your backyard at this point. That's why it's important for you to remain engaged and just to help real policymakers understand that you're using this technology responsibly, including adopting an AI policy framework. NAR is happy to work with you, work with Joe. We really appreciate the opportunity to share where we're at on this. And I don't know if we have time for a question or two, but let me turn it back to Caitlin.
Sorry, I was getting unmuted there. Thank you so much, Austin. That was fantastic. Yeah, open it up. Are there any questions? If not, we can always move on to our next presenter, Elaine Weiss, their Director of Federal Financing and Housing Programs. She's also been a tremendous lead for us when it comes to the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, as she came to us from HUD and the Hill. So, Joe, I think you have the chat bot going with questions. No questions so far, so we will move on to Elaine.
Great. Hi, everyone. And are my slides in this deck, or do I need to? Oh, there we go. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Elaine Weiss. Caitlin, thank you for that wonderful, warm introduction. It's so lovely to be here with you folks. As a Pennsylvanian, have a lot of love for my Delaware neighbors. So just this past Saturday at midnight, it was almost like New Year's Eve for housers, right? The 21st Century Road to Housing Act became law. This is the biggest housing bill in 3 decades. I've been on the Hill now for a while, or worked with the Hill for a long time. And, this was really a special moment for anybody who's worked on housing at the federal level for some time. And so this was, basically a bill that had all these really great ideas that had been discussed sometimes for decades, ideas that had been out there, that there was a lot of bipartisan consensus around, but there just hadn't been that vehicle to really get it across the finish line. And so that's what we saw. We saw that bipartisan, bicameral effort to take all of these really great ideas that there was this broad consensus on and bring them together and pass them through this great piece of legislation. And so some of those ideas include, how do we reform manufactured housing? How do we, incentivize communities to lower zoning barriers? How do we improve, how environmental reviews happen? We have HUD programs that hadn't been reauthorized in decades, right? And so these programs really needed to be modernized, streamlined, see what was working, what's not working, and how do we improve that? And so we saw through the past 2 years at this point, real progress in moving this legislation. And first we saw it with the Senate taking up their package of proposals. That was the Road to Housing Act, and they tried getting it through last year. Then the House had their own proposal, the 21st Century. Now I'm forgetting all the names because it's all become a bit of a jumble, but they had their own package. And then the 2 chambers really worked with each other, right? And so we saw this ping-ponging back and forth of the bill from the House to the Senate, back to the House. Like, I've never seen anything like this, but it really just shows you how the legislative process can work and how it's supposed to be when it works right. Just this ongoing negotiation and conversation about how best to get this legislation across the finish line, and having real stakeholder input at the same time. And so at the end of the day, because of all the efforts that NAR and fellow housing organizations really put in, we provided a lot of research. We had hundreds of lobbying visits. We met with everybody. We met with the House, the Senate, the administration. We had two presidents testify before Congress about the importance of these bills, the provisions that are in them, and how they will really make a difference in helping our country expand housing supply and improve affordability. And so because of that effort, and again, because of this broad consensus around these provisions to help increase housing supply, we saw overwhelming bipartisan support in these bills passing. So you could see in the Senate, it passed 85-5, and in the House, 358-32. So that was at the end of June. This was right when we were actually in RLM. We couldn't have timed it better. We had all these members of NAR going into congressional offices talking about why this was the moment, right? The word affordability is, very much in the conversation. People are really struggling with their costs right now, particularly their housing costs. And this was the message that our members shared with members of Congress of why we needed to get this across the finish line. We were so close, and it was time for Congress to finally pull the trigger and make it happen. So overall, there are 45 plus, I think even maybe 50 plus. I have to do the math, but now that we've had this bill pass, it's all about implementation. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So, I've been talking a lot about the bill, but what's actually in the bill? So as I mentioned before, it takes a comprehensive approach to increasing housing supply and improving affordability. We know that these are the two biggest challenges that our housing system faces in this country. So what does the bill do specifically? It cuts federal, or just cuts government red tape, not just federal, but state level red tape as well. It reforms environmental reviews, and ensures that federal agencies are working with each other to when they're coming up with rules for the road for programs and making sure that they align. It reduces inspection requirements for housing choice vouchers if they align with other inspections. The bill provides new tools and resources for communities. I think this is one of the areas that is most exciting. It will provide best practices. It will have HUD provide best practices to communities of how they could reduce their zoning barriers. It provides new funding to communities to create for grants for pattern zoning. So, there could be more out of the box designs that are automatically approved. It creates new grant programs to help incentivize communities to reduce barriers to housing supply. So lots of new resources, lots of new tools to help local communities do the work, because we know so often when it comes to housing supply, a lot of the decisions, or most of the decisions, are really being made at that state and local level. And so this bill recognizes that and provides the tools and new funding to help those communities address those barriers. As I mentioned before, it improves federal programs and financing. One of the big programs, one of the largest housing block grant programs, the HOME program, hadn't been reauthorized in over a decade, or maybe even 2 decades. And so this bill will reform that program, and it will make it easier for funds to be used for home ownership opportunities, which is really great. Right now, the program, because of current rules, has really limited the ability of communities to use that money for home ownership, think down payment. So these rules will go a long way of allowing those resources to be better utilized for that. It also, the bill also allows community development block grant money to be used for new construction. That's huge, right? This is a program that is funded at $3 billion annually each year, give or take. And so that is funding that is now available for communities to tap into to use for building new housing supply. Under current rules, it was very limited circumstances for when a community could use that. The bill also encourages housing innovation, and I think the one shining example of that is the bill makes it that the permanent chassis, that's that steel piece that is attached to the bottom of a manufactured housing unit, that is no longer required now. That, and this is a really great thing that there again had been broad consensus about, that this just given where manufactured housing has gone, that this steel chassis was no longer needed and was actually inhibiting manufactured housing producers from really innovating in a meaningful way. There's been a lot of innovation within manufactured housing, but this one requirement was still a great limiting factor. It would impact how large the units could be or where they could be placed. And so now, by getting rid of that requirement, the world of manufactured housing is really going to open up and allow for more innovation within that space. The bill also is going to be encouraging more modular construction by having FHA look at what are the barriers to FHA financing a modular housing. We know that modular housing operates on different timelines than typical stick-built housing. And so how do we need to adapt our programs to better be utilized to finance some of these more innovative housing models, because they just work differently than what we're used to. So that was another great provision in the bill. The bill also will help expand homeownership access. There were several provisions around small dollar mortgages. We know that small dollar mortgage in a lot of communities, without that access, especially for manufactured housing as well, makes it harder for people to purchase homes. There were also some adjustments to USDA programs to make loans more assumable. Before this bill was enacted, USDA loans were assumable on paper, but in practice, there were just certain restrictions that made it harder for people to be able to assume those loans. So now this will takes care of that, and hopefully we'll see more USDA loans being assumed. There was some other provisions around allowing USDA financing for properties with ADUs. That was something that USDA had previously prohibited. And then finally, the bill includes a few provisions to support vets, specifically just making sure that vets know about their benefits. We know a lot of vets oftentimes don't know that they can tap into their VA home loan benefits, and then allowing them to see how that benefit compares to other forms of financing, right? Is it better for them to take that VA loan than go conventional or FHA? So really just making sure that veterans are aware of their benefits. So that's what was in the bill in a nutshell. There's some other provisions in there, but if you want to dig into anything more specific, I could take questions, or you could come find me after the webinar. So next slide, please. So, okay, so the bill passed and we were all very excited. We were all staying up till midnight, getting ready to celebrate, but we're now at the part where we're at the implementation, right? And implementation, again, as somebody who has been in, working in federal policy for so long, it's great to pass the law, but implementation is really where the rubber meets the road, right? And so much can go wrong with implementation that it's really important that we don't just take this victory and stop working. We need to keep working to ensure that that those hard-fought, provisions that we got are properly implemented. So none of the provisions in the bill are self-executing. So agencies, they're going to have to act. They're going to have to do it through rulemaking, guidance, notice, program design, all before anybody feels the benefits of this bill. And the law itself prescribes over 100 implementation actions across federal agencies, with HUD having the most of them by far. And that is going to make their capacity and staffing key to staying on track, because we know that a lot of these actions all have they have specific timelines that must be met, per what Congress has required, and that's going to make HUD and these other agencies, getting to work, yesterday, really important, right? We don't want something to lapse or not be properly implemented simply because of a missed deadline. And so, and then another element we need to think about is, I talked about certain new funding that's available, like the Innovation Fund, the money for the pattern zoning. There's money for homeowners to rehabilitate their housing. There's all these, great grant programs that were included, but those grant programs were not actually funded through this bill. And so that's going to take Congress, again, providing that money through the federal spending or appropriations process to, really launch those programs. So we're going to need to keep asking Congress, it's great that you passed this law, but now you actually got to fund it, right? And so all of that to say is that the full implementation of this bill could take years, but and these are provisions, like some of the provisions have been talked about for a while, and I'd like to think that some of these agencies have already done some of the groundwork to get going on some of those notices and rulemaking. So it's those early victories as far as provisions being implemented. So next slide. So that gets to things that you could do. I always like to, give people some tips for how they could get involved instead of just talking at you about what's going on. But the things that you could do. So like I said, there's going to be rulemaking. And so to the extent that there's rulemaking, that's an opportunity to comment on those proposed rules as they are implemented. That's a real opportunity, when the agencies lay out, this is what we're thinking for the rules of the road for this particular provision or this particular program. This is a great opportunity for folks to weigh in and say, oh, I think that's a really great, smart way to go about it. Or, ooh, HUD, have you considered this? This might be a problem. And they have to take all the comments into consideration as they move forward with their rulemaking process. So rulemaking, we weigh in all the time on rulemaking. We love the opportunity to weigh in, and other folks should as well. And it's not just rulemaking. Folks should engage on guidance and program design too. A lot of the important calls that happens through informal processes, and it's not just formal notice and comment. And so to the extent that you have connections with folks at HUD, USDA, Treasury, all of that, you should absolutely be reaching out and asking, what is the plan for implementation? How can we weigh in? What are the timelines? What type of guidance are you putting out? So that's another good way to get your thoughts known. Like I mentioned, federal funding, we need to be pressing lawmakers to fund these new programs because, like I said, they only exist on paper until Congress funds them. That's just the reality. We're in the midst of the fiscal year 27 appropriations process. The House has already put out their bill. The Senate has not. It's a bit dysfunctional at this point with everything going on, but that's very typical of the appropriations process at this point. We used to say appropriation season was from September to the fall, and now it's just a year-round activity that we all do in Washington. But, I think I would be surprised if anything gets funded in fiscal year 27, just given where things are at. But we definitely need to be looking at how do we get these funded in the next fiscal year. So it's really important that to the extent that you are reaching out to your lawmakers and talking about the importance of HUD programs and their funding needs, but we also need to be funding these new programs too. And then on top of, as part of that, agency capacity, unfortunately, a lot of HUD and USDA staff are no longer in these buildings, just given what has transpired over the last 1.5 years. And so agency capacity and staffing is going to be a real issue as they try to implement these programs and provisions. And so it's really vital that we support the staffing and capacity needs of these agencies as we talk about their funding, right? There's only so many people in the building who can write rules and regulations. So it's really important that we support the staff as well, because the rules aren't going to write themselves. And then finally, start local now. So, like I said, there's going to be a lot of implementing going on, but I think right now there are some broad strokes or ideas that folks I think can really tap into and start looking about how can, what is what's out there, like what could people possibly tap into as far as, the new programs, the new grants, the new rules, really looking at how can you help your community position itself to compete for some of these new funds that might be coming down the pike. Or, like I said, CDBG funding is now available for new construction. What can you be doing in your community to be pushing for some of that money to be used for new construction? So really start thinking locally when you're thinking about this, very large federal bill. But, at the end of the day, this is all about communities implementing that and really starting to put a bug in the ear of folks who, control this money at the local level about, some of the new flexibilities and money coming down the pike. So those are my recommendations for things that you could be doing now. We're going to be very much, like I said, keeping an eye on this implementation for the foreseeable future at this point. Like I said, it's going to take more than a minute. But again, we're just so over the moon happy that this bill was enacted. It really represents so much hard work that's been done at NAR and across the housing ecosystem. So it's a real victory for housing all around. We're not going to rest on our laurels. We're going to still be pushing for more housing legislation, though, because we know that this is a first step, not the end, the last step. And so, but it is a really great victory that we should be holding up and very proud of. So thank you so much for letting me present today on it.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Caitlin, Austin, and Elaine, and for the timely updates on the federal legislation and the ever-changing platform of AI in our industry. Now we're going to turn to our state update, and it's going to be presented by our Government Affairs Director, Joe Brennan. Joe, can you tell us about the major legislative initiatives this year and what we can look for next year?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Very much appreciate the introduction. Let's start with a topic that dominated 2025 and is still very much alive in 2026, property tax reassessment. This was, without question, the single most significant housing-related event in Delaware last year, and it directly impacted our members and the clients that we have every day. Today, I want to walk you through what happened, what passed since, and what's still ahead for this year. We felt across Newcastle County, many residents saw their property taxes skyrocket after the major changes in over 4 decades. That session resulted in 6 bills and 1 resolution being passed. 2 of the biggest pieces, House Bill 242, allowed Newcastle County school districts to set separate tax rates for residential versus non-residential properties. And Senate Bill 202 is set to separate tax rates for residential as actually to submit quarterly data, requires Newcastle County to submit quarterly data to the legislature. Beyond that immediate package, a special legislative committee was also formed, and it held 4 public hearings through the end of 2025 to study longer-term reform. Okay. So talking about this special legislative session, you have the bills there. This was convened at the tail end of last year. So this was the first step in how the state wanted to regard our property tax reassessment debate. Continuing on, a follow-up package that came in 2026. Fast forward to the last day of this year's session, and lawmakers passed a follow-up package, starting with House Bill 460, which expands municipal permit data and reporting in Newcastle County ahead of the next reassessment. Then you have House Bill 461, which lets Newcastle County school districts reset their 26-27 tax rates to reflect ongoing roll corrections. And then followed up with House Bill 462 that extends the residential, non-residential split rate authority for Newcastle County school districts, but it lowered it from a 1-to-2 ratio to a 1 to 1.85. All three now await the governor's signature. So on the flip side of that, you also had a bill introduced, Senate Bill 350, that did not make it through. This bill would have created 4 statewide property tax classifications and treated apartments as residential for tax purposes, something the governor has pushed for before, but it never went out made it out of the Senate Executive Committee. And so this bill did not make it through. It did not get passed, largely due to opposition from the counties and school districts. So on the one hand, you have some of these bills that did make it through, that did create some incremental change. But that SB 350 would have been a major shift in how we see property taxes in the state of Delaware. So now we're going to talk about a little different format or different platform on the rental housing side. And this is something that our landlords and property managers are very influential in. So we're going to talk about 4 specific bills here today: House Bill 311, House Bill 451, Senate Bill 116, and House Bill 217. And so all 4 of these bills have a different story to tell, different outcomes for different reasons. And that's solely based on the influence and the advocacy of members like yourselves. So House Bill 217, we'll actually talk about House Bill 311. This had a major impact from DAR. And this was, many of our members actually helped draft this bill over the last 2 years. And in partnership with the tenant side stakeholders, to land on a genuinely balanced approach. This isn't a bill that favors one side. It's meant to bridge a relationship between landlords and tenants. And so this has been a navigational tool that we've been using for some time, is trying to work with our stakeholders, even though we disagree with them on things, but trying to create a balanced approach to legislation. A couple of key provisions in this. This establishes a committee to review the guide annually. This requires updates to reflect available technology and other changes over time. And so what you'll have is similar to what Newcastle County already has, is a statewide landlord and tenant rights and responsibilities guide that helps have that balanced approach in communication. And DAR is going to continue to work with the Real Estate Commission to actually draft the guide that's going to be used statewide. Next, we have House Bill 217. This is a key surrender bill. This regards the process for turning over a property to between tenant and landlord, and this has already gone into effect. So we want to make sure you understand that this one has already become law. And this one amends Title 25. It also closes a gap a lot of us have run into. What happens when the lease ends on a weekend or a holiday and the office is closed? So under this bill, possession is treated as returned once the tenant follows the lease key return process, or if the lease doesn't specify one, a statutory fallback. Returning keys in person the next business day. And for multi-tenant leases, possession isn't considered returned until every tenant on the lease has been complied. DAR was instrumental in crafting language for this bill, working directly with sponsors to strike a balance between a clear process for tenants and landlords and the ability to confirm that possession has actually changed hands. And so this was another win for us this year to get the language. Even through the amendment process, our members were directly involved in that process. Next, Senate Bill 116, the right to redemption. So this one also did pass. This one started off in a much more difficult version for us as landlords. And so through direct advocacy, this bill was significantly reduced in its impact. It creates what's called a right of redemption. In plain terms, a tenant facing eviction for non-payment of rent can stop that eviction at any point before the writ is actually executed, as long as they pay everything they owe, back rent, court costs, and fees. This one's worth comparing the original version to what ultimately passed because the bill changed quite a bit along the way. It was amended to extend the repeat use look-back period from 12 months to 24, to require tenants to proactively file for a stay if payment comes in after the writ of possession has already been posted, to require payment on all rent due under the lease, not just the past due amount, and to let landlords restrict payment methods to whatever specified in the lease. It was also narrowed so it only applies to non-payment of rent evictions. Bottom line, this bill did pass, but our involvement throughout the process shaped the final language in a meaningful way. House Bill 451, and for those of you who may not be familiar with the term desperate impact, this is something that has become part of our vocabulary here in Delaware, coming after the federal government and through the Supreme Court's definition of what that means. And so House Bill 451 was introduced in June of this year as a placeholder bill. It proposed language similar to federal disparate impact protections, but honestly, it went further than the federal standard. DAR engaged directly with the stakeholders on this one, particularly around concerns with the curing process and how it would actually work in practice. Where it stands right now, it's been tabled for next year. We're going to continue our direct engagement with Delaware State Housing Authority and other stakeholders to try and land on a more balanced approach before it comes back. So as a result of specific member engagement with both the sponsors of the bill and the main stakeholder on this bill, which was the State Housing Authority, this bill was tabled. And so we will continue to work on this. This was the outcome we were looking for, at least on this bill. And that's part of the process for legislation that we often look for is if it's not a good answer to a problem now, let's work on a better solution. And so that's what we had. So now I want to hand off to our Public Policy Committee Chair, Chris Allen, who's going to share some of the major housing development initiatives that we saw this year and could see impact sooner rather than later. So go ahead, take it away, Chris.
Thanks, Joe. Now we're going to shift into affordable housing and zoning reform. Executive Order 18 fast tracks affordable housing, energy, manufacturing, and broadband projects through a coordinated. It's off.
Yes.
Oh. I start again. Executive Order 18 fast tracks affordable housing, energy, manufacturing, and broadband projects through a coordinated state permitting process. Alongside that, House Bill 450 eliminates most traffic impact studies and specifically removes the traffic study requirement for downtown development. This legislation also modernizes transportation funding. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars directed toward infrastructure over the next decade. And it includes brownfield redevelopment funding as well as increased housing density in designated growth areas. This bill passed both chambers in the General Assembly and waits for the governor's signature. We anticipate this bill will be signed into law. Senate Bill 23, Housing for Every Delawarean Act. Senate Bill 23 builds on SJR 8 pilot program, which offers free technical assistance for zoning code modernization. The goals here are to balance communities, reduce commutes, and strengthen local planning capacity. This bill faced significant opposition from local governments and was amended multiple times to better protect local control. This bill also passed the General Assembly and is awaiting the governor's signature. For our members, this has real implications. It affects development patterns, land use, and future housing inventory. Senate Bill 201, that was the wholesaling in Delaware. Senate Bill 201, to be clear about what this bill does and doesn't do, it does not ban wholesaling in the state. What it does is bring the practice under the oversight of the Division of Professional Regulation. This bill moved with bipartisan support the entire way through the legislative process. And we see it as a significant consumer protection win for Delaware home buyers and sellers. DAR members were very instrumental in drafting this bill and shepherding it through the General Assembly all the way until it was signed by the governor. Senate Bill 9, Watershed Stewardship Act, Senate Bill 9 creates a statewide wetlands program that includes additional wetlands no longer regulated at the federal level. DAR has been actively engaged on this throughout our Wetlands Committee, and we hold a seat on the Regulatory Advisory Council. This could affect permitting and buildability on certain parcels, so we're monitoring implementation closely and will keep you updated as a member of the RAC. Switching gears to the realty transfer tax, Delaware has the highest state level RTT in the nation, so this remains a priority to us. House Bill 416 would have reduced the state RTT by 0.25%, but it died in the House Appropriations Committee. House Bill 407 originally attempted to redirect RTT funding to support brownfields redevelopment programs. It was amended to remove that funding mechanism, and in the amended form, passed both chambers. And House Bill 286, which would have exempted properties valued under $350,000 from the state RTT, also died in the House Appropriations Committee. Overall, we're seeing growing bipartisan interest in reducing this transfer tax burden, and even incremental relief makes a meaningful difference in affordability and transaction costs. DAR is going to keep pushing on this. Key takeaways for 2026. Pulling this all together, property tax reassessment reform is ongoing, and we expect more legislation on that front before the year is out. Affordable housing and zoning reform, Senate Bill 23, Executive Order 18, and House Bill 450 are going to shape development patterns across the state, and realty transfer tax relief has real momentum building. I also want to point out that DAR was instrumental in getting 3 bills passed by the General Assembly this session. Our advocacy efforts are getting stronger every single year, and that's a direct result of members like you staying engaged. That concludes our state legislative update for 2026. Now I'm going to introduce Andy Taylor, DAR's legal counsel, and he will give us important regulatory updates that highlights a pivotal moment and how we make decisions in Delaware. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Chris. So a couple things to follow up on there. Senate Bill 201, which we talked about for the wholesaling, also included some updates to the Real Estate Guarantee Fund and made it a little easier for the process for a member of the public who's been harmed to try to recover funds from the Real Estate Guarantee Fund. So that was a direct result of some claims that were made at the commission and some difficulties that commissioners had with trying to award money that really should be paid to compensate those members of the public that were harmed. So that's a very good improvement to the guarantee fund process in Delaware. The Real Estate Commission is hard at work on reviewing their entire bank of regulations in order to make updates to that. So I've been very involved with that as your legal counsel. I do not represent the Real Estate Commission. They're very well represented by the Attorney General's office, but I do attend most of their meetings and give input when we're allowed to do so. And so that process is ongoing with them reviewing their regulations. In addition, the what used to be called Sunset Committee of the General Assembly will be reviewing the Delaware Real Estate Commission next year. And this is a good opportunity and a real key opportunity for DAR to have input to revisions to the entire licensing act. And so if you have comments for things that you think should be revised in the licensing act or the rules and regulations of the Real Estate Commission, please feel free to send me an email, include Wes and Joe on that, and we'll put it into the process for consideration. DAR has a regulatory and legislative update committee that is going to be hard at work on this as well. So we do plan to have meaningful input on that, and we already have a list of things that we have on the docket for things that we hope should be considered as part of that review process. So there's your regulatory update. I'm going to shift now to talking some about what I view as a really key issue and a shift in Delaware of state versus local control, recent Delaware Supreme Court case on that, and what I see coming next for that, Joe. So remember that our private property rights, and DAR is one of the key supporters and defenders of private property rights in the state of Delaware, and NAR on the national level, really derives from the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution going back to 1791. And no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. And Joe, there's a similar provision within the Delaware Constitution of 1897, nor shall any person's property be taken or applied to public use without the consent of his or her representatives, without compensation being made. And so that's where our Constitution protects private property rights. Then the authority to adopt zoning and subdivision, remember that's part of the police power, we call it, you studied in pre-licensing class, that it starts with the state. So that police power resides with the state. And in Delaware, we're going to put on the screen the Delaware Constitution, Article 2, Section 25. And so here's the wording of that. And notice that what it says, the General Assembly may enact laws to grant some of that land use authority to the local governments, which has been done. Go ahead, Joe. So the state's power, the police power begins with the state. The state has granted some of that power to local governments, but the state can take back some of that power, as we've seen them do this year. And that's where I think we have to anticipate more in the future. So I'm going to review some key provisions of a Delaware Chancery Court case and Delaware Supreme Court case, and then talk a little bit about how it was almost immediately acted upon with General Assembly override of the governor's veto on the marijuana bill. So the Delaware Supreme Court case dealt with Sussex County's of a refusal of a permit, allowing a special use permit for electric substations. And so there's some key quotes from this that I think show us where this is going. So the General Assembly passed Senate Bills 159 and 199, which negated the Sussex County permit denial. So Sussex County denied the permit, General Assembly overrode that, basically meaning the permit was granted. The governor signed that legislation the same day. And we're going to take a look at some key quotes here from these cases. As the Chancery Court explained in its ruling, the General Assembly and the governor found that, quote, the substation is critical to the offshore wind turbine project, and wind turbine development is a key part of the state's efforts to fight climate change and transition Delaware to renewable forms of energy. So the Chancery held then that the General Assembly has plenary land use authority, and they could reclaim some of that power that they've delegated to the counties and municipalities. And you'll see that's reclaimed even after the county or a municipality has acted. So if the General Assembly can craft a bill with it being a critical issue that they feel to the state, then they can override that. And the court noted that through various statutes, the General Assembly has delegated that zoning authority to county and municipal governments, which we typically just generically call local land use control. But we see that they can change or they can revoke that delegated authority, and that they've done so before as well. So here the county council denied a permit for an electrical substation. General Assembly decided greater interests were at stake and crafted their bill to say that, pass that legislation then that override the county council's permit denial, and the state, as the ultimate authority for zoning policy throughout the state, could do so. And so my comment is, what will be the next greater interest that the General Assembly decides they need to act on to either push something within land use control or to overturn something with land use control? So let's take a bit more at this. So this court then recognized the General Assembly's constitutional authority to regulate zoning through legislative acts. The General Assembly controls the zoning power. And even though it has delegated that power to the counties and municipalities, it has the power to reclaim it and need not defer to the decisions of subordinate governments, meaning counties or municipalities. And therefore, then the Supreme Court affirmed the judgment of the Court of Chancery. And this happened very quickly through the court process, very thoroughly and well written opinions. But what this did then, it reminded the legislature that they control land use and can override local decisions. So my question is, what will we see them do next with that power that they've been reminded of? Well, we've already seen them take one action, June 30th, which, as you know, is the last day of the legislative session. In the Delaware House of Representatives, House Majority Whip Ed Osinski that brought a motion for the chamber to consider an override of Governor Meyer's veto of Senate Bill 75, which would have prohibited county governments from creating restrictive zoning regulations on legal marijuana shops. And some interesting quotes from that last hours of the session. He said the override decision came after a Delaware Supreme Court ruling in May that we just reviewed declared the state government has ultimate authority over land use issues. The General Assembly controls zoning power, Osinski said. Notice that Governor Meyer, having come out of Newcastle County government, he had vetoed that bill that would have overridden it. So the General Assembly is saying, well, we think differently. And so his comment here really highlighted the persistent debate we've had in Delaware politics around the power of local land use control versus state authority. So ultimately, the House then voted to override the veto. And these were some quotes that came from a Spotlight Delaware article, which I think is doing an excellent job of local reporting. So now what I have on this slide, I want to be clear, this is strictly Andy's comment. This is not DAR policy. It's not a position of DAR. This is just Andy. But it's my view from looking at this across the country that a socialist democratic viewpoint is really contrary to private property rights. Their view seems to be, of many of them, not all, but many of them, is that it's not private property. It's common community property. It's not private property. And therefore, they argue the government should have more control over the use of that property and the profits from it, or limiting how much profit can be made from your private property. Witness in Delaware, the recent efforts that there have been on some local and state levels to enact rent control or rent stabilization efforts in Delaware, which have not passed to this point. And I'd say to you, and this is just Andy, just follow what's happening in New York City, and you'll see what some people then will be trying to bring to Delaware. So this says to me as well that your political involvement in the entire legislative process and in the political process of primaries, particularly in Delaware, and the full general elections in Delaware is absolutely critically important. And so we need to be vigilant and to participate in that process And that's wherever you are politically on any particular issue, your involvement is critical. So with that, I think we're going to see if there's any additional questions maybe that have come in on the chat and see if we have any further.
Thank you, Andy. I don't think we have any questions at this time. So I want to take a minute and thank you all so much for joining us today. You can find more information. You'll see a slide with our website and email contact, and a reminder, if you're signed up for our weekly newsletter and following us on social media, so you won't miss out on any updates between now and our next forum. Before I close, I want to say how much your feedback means to us. Every bill, every position that DAR takes starts with hearing from members like you about what's actually happening in your transactions. If today's forum raised a topic you care about, the best way to have a real voice in is to get involved with one of our committees. We've got a number of ways to plug in, from public policy, where we shape DAR's legislative priorities, to our subcommittees that help draft legislation actions that we saw come to fruition this year, along with RPAC and our Professional Standards Committee. Reach out to us at DAR. We love to have you at the table. Thank you for joining us today and for your constant engagement with our state leaders. We look forward to next year as we pursue further initiatives to protect an individual's right to own, use, and transfer property. Thank you so much.